Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The most historical state of all, the great state of Virginia. Mr. Rowe and our other witnesses, thanks for being with us here today. We continue to hear stories of how and where CRT has been incorporated into government school curriculums, blaming everything on race, looking at everything through a racial lens, determined to divide students and individuals based on race, designating victims and oppressors based on race, dishonestly presenting our nation's founding and our history, denying the progress that's been made in this country. For example, the election of a black president, the election of a black vice president, our current black House Minority Leader, and yet somehow Democrats repeat the lie that CRT is not in our K-12 schools. Of course, we don't have in K-12 schools a class called CRT, but can you speak once again to how this harmful dogma, this harmful ideology permeates the classrooms and the curriculums in our government schools?
Yeah, I did give a few examples, but let me also say we are so fixated on race. According to the nation's report card, the National Assessment for Educational Progress, there has never been a year in which a majority of white students are reading at grade level, at 4th grade, 8th grade, and 12th grade. So if we were to close this racial achievement gap that we often talk about between black and white students, all we will have achieved is achieving universal mediocrity. And so this obsession with critical race theory, we're spending so much time talking about issues of race when we have a widespread literacy crisis. It's a huge distraction. And it is much more likely that the reasons all kids across race are not reading at grade level is because we don't have focus on things like the science of reading, accurate access to high quality curricula that is very comprehensive and accurate. That's what we should be spending our time on versus the practices associated with critical race theory that often end up perpetuating the very division that it is asserting to address.
Widespread mediocrity does seem to be the goal of some, and you can see what the priorities are by what we fund. In Virginia, there's many examples of racist CRT ideology in our government schools. In Albemarle County, in the Charlottesville area, in my district, parents actually sued the government schools over curriculum infested with CRT because they understood that teaching children to treat people differently based on race is not only wrong, but it's illegal. That's why I sponsored a bill, by the way, Defending Students' Civil Rights Act, to clarify that it's a violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to teach critical race theory in schools that receive government funding. And with all of these examples, it's even worse when it's the federal government that's funding it. And we got numerous examples of that. Schools use their COVID-19 funding to promote these CRT ideas under a guise of managing the problems, or managing the pandemic, I should say. Virginia's Board of Education reported that COVID-19 funds were used to support Virginia's, quote, roadmap to equity, end quote. The Virginia plan promises to advance racial equity and hold a commitment to the principles of anti-racism. Of course, the Biden administration has made racial ideology a budget priority, requesting $100 million in new spending recently to support racial and socioeconomic diversity in schools, calling for $468 million for a community schools program that embeds culturally relevant ideology and restorative justice practices. And then the Parents Defending Education's online indoctrination map shows hundreds of examples of government schools promoting CRT curriculum and policies that directly impact students. How widespread is this in your studies, in your experience? How widespread is this in our nation's government schools?
I would say it's relatively widespread. When you use the term racial equity, that is a euphemism for equal outcomes by racial group. And so, for example, any racial disparity then becomes the goal is to close that gap. So again, I share that there has never been a majority of white students reading at grade level. So achieving racial outcomes by group, again, it's this idea of universal mediocrity, the idea of eliminating objective assessments at the state level. There are many states now that are eliminating, even in New York State, we're about to eliminate the New York State regents, which for years has been the gold standard for how a student would demonstrate that they actually know reading and math sufficiently to graduate. But those objective assessments are being eliminated across the country. It's a real tragedy because now they're being replaced with amorphous mechanisms by which students demonstrate that they're graduating from high school ready for college.
Thank you, Mr.